Hey YouTube, welcome back. This is your host Pixel Peepers. Today we have something new for you guys. It's a special video, so sit back, relax and enjoy the video. But before we start, thank you all guys. We've just reached 1,000 subscribers. We're not going to stop here. We're going to keep making videos and let's have some fun. So first let's talk about how we're gonna do this. For each comparison set we have 4 pictures, 2 of them taken with the Xperia phone and 2 of them taken with the Alpha camera. For both of them we've shot 1 photo in superior auto mode and 1 photo in full manual mode with the same ISO, shutter speed and aperture. The only difference between the 2 cameras was the field of view. The Xperia phone has a 25mm lens and the Sony Alpha camera uses a Sony 50mm f1.8 lens with a 77mm full frame equivalent. So, as you see, the Xperia phone has a much wider field of view and I had to compensate the difference by closing in on the subject. For the last 4 photos we used a kit lens on the Alpha camera, so we could shoot photos in the same depth of field as the Sony phone. But this lens has a minimum aperture of f3.5, so we couldn't emulate the exact exposure values of the phone in manual mode. That is why we only shot in superior auto mode with this lens. Anyway, let's get down to business. For the first set we found a beautiful yellow flower surrounded by green leaves. Here are the 2 photos taken with the phone and the other 2 taken with the camera. Placing them side by side and we already can see a world of difference. What is promising is that colors are very similar. Superior auto mode on both cameras deliver a more yellow flower, while on manual mode the flower is more orange. Greens are the same. The auto mode of the Xperia delivers the brightest exposure with the best dynamic range, but let's zoom in so we can see the real differences. Right now you might say that the Sony phone is much sharper than the Sony camera. How is that possible? Well, the processing on the phone over-sharpens details quite a bit, and looking closer, much of that apparent detail is just noise. Sure, the petals of the flower indeed have more texture and slightly sharper details on the Xperia photos, but if you clear out the noise, picture will be left as soft and flat as the ones on the Alpha camera. Of all, the manual shot of the A6000 is the softest. We all know that stopping down a prime lens to its largest aperture delivers softer results and very shallow depth of field. The subject separation and bokeh on the mirrorless camera photos are also much better, giving the A6000 uses a much bigger sensor. On to the next set, another flower, but this time it's more open space, and just by browsing through them we see how big the difference is in depth of field. Placing them side by side, again we notice the XZ2 in auto mode delivered the brightest photo. Colors are good on all photos, but if we take the A6000 photos as a benchmark, we can see that the red on the XZ2 photos are slightly more magenta. Bigger differences can also be found when zooming in, and this time, because reds are always so hard for a small sensor to capture, the flower in the Xperia photos have less details, even if some might say the opposite. But again, don't confuse noise with details, as the Xperia photos have much more noise than the Sony mirrorless camera ones. Also, the background and bokeh on the Xperia photos is much busier and way too harsh compared to the A6000 photos, which also have a very soft and creamy bokeh. It's almost the same story in the next 2 sets of photos with the garden ornaments. Again, superior auto in the Xperia phone delivers the brightest photo, so for all of you watching this video, in bright daylight it is recommended to use the exposure slider and slightly underexpose the entire scene. Colors are also pretty similar, and it's a good news that Sony doesn't oversaturate the flowers and the other leaves like other manufacturers do with their phones. But taking a closer look, it's obvious that Sony goes slightly overboard with oversharpening in their phones. This, coupled with the noise present even in daylight in all photos, gives us the impression that the Xperia phone delivers sharper and more detailed photos than the mirrorless camera do. Well, this isn't true, and both the cameras deliver in my opinion the same level of details, only that the Xperia phones oversharpen it. Anyway, again it's a great achievement for the XZ2 to hold its own against the best-selling mirrorless camera on the market. But where the phone camera loses hands down is in depth of field and bokeh department, where simply put there is no comparison. The much larger sensor of the A6000 is obviously better here. Moving on, we took 4 shots of Missy the cat, my mom's favorite pet. Here the differences are slightly less noticeable, but still apparent. Sony Xperia XZ2 again oversharpens the image, but this time I might say that it doesn't look bad at all. Colors again are pretty much the same, exposure is the same, and the only difference is the narrow depth of field of the Sony Alpha photos. The f2 aperture of the same A6000 photos delivers such a narrow depth of field that only the cat's eyes are in focus. The nose and ears being in different focal length, they are out of focus. And here comes, in my opinion, the main weakness of the Xperia phone: portrait photography. First, we see 2 pictures of my wife, both in superior auto and manual mode. Now the exact same 2 pictures, shot with the Alpha mirrorless camera. It's almost like it's an entirely different woman in the picture. Why is that, you might ask? Well, it's the difference between the field of view, the Xperia phone having a much wider field of view. It is more suited for landscape photography, street photography, indoor group shots, but under no circumstances portrait photography is one of its strengths. The wide-angle lens distorts the image too much, and even if you enable in-camera settings distortion correction, the barrel effect is still very apparent. On the other hand, the lens used on the Alpha camera is perfect for portrait with its 77 focal lengths. Field of view aside, other differences are what we expected. The Xperia phone has the same natural colors but the same oversharpening artifacts. The Alpha 6000 did a much better job here. But we decided it's time to switch lenses on the Sony Alpha camera, and we equipped it with a 16 to 50mm zoom lens so we can shoot photos having the same field of view as the Sony phone without closing into the subject. The problem is that this lens starts at f3.5 aperture, so it would have been pointless to try and shoot in manual mode with both cameras with the same aperture value. So for the next picture we have only superior auto shots. Placing them side by side, in this set we finally notice more similarities between the two. Colors are a little more vibrant on the Alpha camera, contrast is better on the Xperia phone, but the field of view is the same now, and depth of field is also comparable. Oversharpening is still an issue, but let's be sincere for a moment. This is an issue that we will encounter in all phones, no matter the manufacturer. They all try to market a very sharp lens and high resolution sensor with an oversharpening filter applied over the photos. Moving on to the last 2 sets of photos, these are the types best suited for the wide field of view of the Xperia camera, landscapes. But this time the Sony phone doesn't perform so well in colors, exposure and dynamic range. Colors are a little flat, exposure is again slightly high and dynamic range is good, but it's slightly narrower than on the mirrorless camera. Placing them side by side and zooming in, we still notice the oversharpening of the Xperia phone. But still, it's commendable that the smartphone is holding its own in detail department against the 24 megapixel mirrorless camera. As a conclusion, what did we find out? Well, first, as a primary impression, there is still a long way to go for a smartphone camera until we can reach the quality of a good DSLR or mirrorless camera. The smallest differences between the two was in colors, and here we all know that in the world of smartphones, Sony is one of, if not the best, delivering great natural colors. The detail and clarity battle is also a close one, but here the main difference is that Sony tries on the Xperia line of smartphones to boost details with aggressive oversharpening, and this issue is very often found in the smartphone world. This is only made worse by the amount of noise in the smartphone photos, even in daylight. The end result is a very sharp picture, but if we zoom in, details are exaggerated, oversharpened, noise is apparent, and the overall results seem very coarse. But the biggest difference between the two cameras is the depth of field. At the same aperture of f2, there is a world of difference. f2 aperture on the phone is the equivalent of f8 on the mirrorless camera, while f2 on the mirrorless camera feels like 3 portrait modes stacked one onto the other on the Sony phone. And the XZ2 doesn't even have a portrait mode. It has background defocus and it's plain trash with edge recognition. So answering the question, can a very good smartphone camera from Sony replace a good mirrorless or DSLR? Short answer, hell no. Long answer, if you are willing to sacrifice the image quality and you are not willing to carry bigger and heavier equipment, then maybe, possibly, you could end up with decent results on the XZ2 camera that could satisfy your needs as long as you don't shoot portraits. But then again, a Sony XZ2 is $600 and it's a great phone, great camera for a smartphone, and great multimedia and internet browsing device. A Sony A6000 with a 50mm f1.8 lens is $1,000 and it's only a camera. Which one is the best for you depends how serious you are with your holiday photos. So guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed our video. Stay tuned for part 2 of this comparison between the Sony A6000 and the Sony XZ2 in low light. Until then, goodbye and good luck.